Now that the foundation was laid for understanding in the last video, this will be my final video on rural logistics and how it affects operational tempos and movement and operations overall in general. For both the partisans and also for the invasion and occupation forces. Now, when the Broken Bow story began, the first story, you have to remember that the Chicoms had just invaded and had the total initiative. They were already stocked and ready with all their logistics and supplies, everything they needed for the full-fledged invasion, the full-blown invasion of the United States. So when they captured the land, they came with everything they needed to establish fobs, to change out parts in their vehicles. They came with all their fuel. They came with all their armaments and everything they needed to establish their fobs, much like the fob at Broken Bow. Now, much like anything, things run out, including logistics and supplies. But for a while, they had the initiative. They were able to. The forces that came into Broken Bow, the detachment from the 11th Armored and also the PAP companies and the Recon Cav Scout company that came into the Broken Bow area and established their AO, they had the initiative still. I mean, it was only 2 days after the invasion, really one day, because the first day they came and did a recon and force in the town area. But the second day was when they surrounded the town and captured it. And when you saw things like, Route 259 getting hit as the partisans tried to solidify their their logistical capabilities and take it up into the foothills, into the mountains, where their original base camp was, here by Hoka and the Route 259A cabins by the lake. Well, essentially, what you had was, again, you had a massive evacuation. You had delaying actions fought, like so, on Route 70, where they ambushed the leading two tanks of the tank columns of the tanks and mech infantry grenadiers that were with them and the AT company behind them. They ambushed them to buy time in the east here, to buy time for people to get out of the town while this ambush was happening here, to get all the supplies they could out, because the partisans would need supplies long term to even survive. They needed food and water and ammo and medical and everything you can imagine to just to get by. So what you saw at the very end is the trap was slamming shut. Is you saw the final battle for Route 259, where the town opens up into a field right before the foothills, right before it goes up into the mountainous foothills. And you saw the men here taking cover, basically, along a mound along the side of the road and using it as like a trench system of sorts, and fighting these troops going through this hilly area here of field. And the tanks came, as did the AT company. Here's two vehicles from that company. And then the mech inf grenadiers and their APCs and IFVs. And you can see the 30 millimeters hitting here, blast. And you see the WZATs fired their HJ-12 AT missiles. And, here's the partisans fighting back. And this is Route 259 right here. And they tried to hold it as long as they could, but eventually they just couldn't, because the PAP coming up through the town, doing the town clearing itself, ended up flanking them on the from the south here, as the pincers slammed shut from the east and the west, and the town was fully surrounded. And these men were mostly annihilated and killed, eventually even by bayonets, as the infantry troops dismounted and charged their positions here. But in the town itself, you had house clearing going on, and many people tried to fight back against the PAP, but they were brutally slaughtered and put down. The tempo was fast. I mean, it did take 3 hours to subdue the entire town, but that was only because of the heavy resistance and the competent American leadership that it took 3 hours. Normally, a town clearing of that size would have taken maybe 45 minutes to an hour. But because of the exceptional resistance put up, it took more time. So, that said, the partisans fled. They went in there up into the foothills and established their base of operations and cached away supplies, had everything they needed. But eventually, the fob was built up, supplies were brought in, some even by plane as the runway got expanded a little bit longer, and for larger cargo planes to come in. Eventually, armies were linked to their supply hubs and mega fobs via major roads like 259 and 70, and convoys began to take in supplies to build up for major operations. It takes a lot of supplies to launch a major military operation, you guys. It's not just something they can just get up and do. They have to have the spare parts, the fuel, the ammunition, the mortars, the rockets, all the other types of munitions, the shells, everything. They have to have tools. They have to have maintenance bays. They have to have all that stuff set up. And they have to rotate and refit and replenish troops that, were lost or wounded. They have to make sure all their ducks are in a row, essentially, before they can launch a major operation. And that goes for the partisans, too. But the thing about the partisans is they didn't have any heavy vehicles, so they didn't have to do all this extra work for vehicle maintenance and preparation. So that gave them some leeway insofar as doing operations like the strike upon the Eagletown area here, where they attacked the Lao guy and the small tank company that was holding this area here, and the PAP that was in the town. It was a hit-and-run attack, and it was largely successful, although they did suffer heavy losses, of course, because the attrition rate on the partisan side is always much more than that of the organized, well-disciplined, well-prepared military side. I don't want people to lose sight of that and forget that. And you would even have elite troops like the Spetsnaz going up and hunting partisans in the mountains. Here's one squad being dropped off by Hind helicopter, which is actually a unique type of attack helicopter that can drop off a squad of troops and serve as a mobile firing platform for rockets and machine gun fire. It's actually an anti-tank helicopter in many ways, but it can also transport a squad of troops. And Spetsnaz is using the VVS, the Russian Air Force Hind, to drop them off here. And they're in their diamond formation, fast roping down, about to go up into the mountains to clear it of partisans. And essentially you would have a lot of preparation, but then when they launched a major invasion, or a major operation like up here to clear the valley, you would have all the units all ready. I mean, all their vehicles would be ready, all their foods and MREs would be ready, and water and everything. They would have everything they needed to push up into the valley, because it takes, again, a lot of logistics to do that. The vehicles all have to be ready. Everything, the troops, everything has to be ready. But then they could launch these types of operations like Operation Skull Bash. And it took a lot of juggling of different units to be able to achieve these things, but they were able to sustain heavy operations, clearing operations like this over time. Sometimes they would have to take time to do a refit and a rotation, but they could continually do this, because as long as their logistical supplies were not threatened, they could keep piling up their logistics and stockpile them and use them for further operations into partisan areas. And air made that possible largely because huge quantities of goods could be brought in by air, logistics, and also with road. But then towards the end, you had a major partisan operation where they struck with their extra numbers coming up from Texas and the Indian advisors that were with them that helped train and arm them. They struck Millerton, and the Indian advisors brought them a aid package, and the aid package helped them be able to sustain operations in the Millerton area, while the other partisans came in and hit the dam in the Hokotown in this area. And all these things happened while John the ex-Green Beret and his elite we to the Gers decapitated the leadership, which the Chi-Coms, which threw them off keel. Without leadership, their captains of their different companies couldn't take initiative. Many didn't. And that caused confusion, and the confusion made it possible for the partisans to strike, and strike hard. And then when they hit them hard, they were able to move up and hit other combat outposts, isolate and hit them, and these checkpoints. and then moved back down. They tried to hit the fob, but the fob was well enough defended that there was no real chance they could even, have a successful blow against it. So then they retreated out of the area, but they did use the area to lob some mortars. John and his elite we to the Gurs lobbed some mortars, and the artillery, the 2 captured howitzers, were used. But then eventually, Chi-Com leadership was replaced, and extra units were pushed up as this was a heavy area of resistance. So they dispatched even more units from their 83rd Group Army headquarters in Texarkana. So they sent up even more heavy units and also even more light infantry units to accompany them. And they ended up slaughtering much of the partisans. And very few of them survived to the end of the war. But that, in a sense, is how logistics affect the ebb and flow of war. And here, as it goes out, I'll show you the battle here in Millerton.